I've seen a lot of strange things on the road. Trucking long enough does that to you, puts you in places you don't belong, makes you witness things no one else would believe. I've driven through endless deserts where the horizon sways like a mirage, past towns so abandoned that it felt like time itself had given up on them. But nothing compares to that night on the highway. It was the dead hours, somewhere past midnight, and the road stretched ahead like an unbroken thread, disappearing into blackness. A ribbon of asphalt, flanked by nothing but barren land and the occasional skeletal outline of trees. The sky was empty, the stars lost behind a thick cover of clouds, and my headlights carved twin tunnels of light through the dark. The hum of the engine, the rhythmic thud of the tires against the cracked pavement, it was hypnotic. Then I saw her. At first, she was just a pale smudge in the distance, something barely distinguishable from the mist curling along the edges of the road. As I drew closer, the shape sharpened. A woman. She was walking along the shoulder, her white dress flowing around her ankles, her movements slow and deliberate, like she had all the time in the world. Her head was tilted downward, dark hair spilling over her face, obscuring every feature. She didn't turn, didn't react to the low rumble of my truck as I approached. Something about her posture was unsettling, too still, too rigid, like a mannequin dressed in silk and left adrift along the highway. My first thought was that she was a hitchhiker. I'd seen them before, people stranded on empty stretches of road, hoping for a ride. But there was something wrong about her. No buck, no raised thumb, no sign of distress. Just that eerie stillness, that blank presence that didn't seem entirely real. I gripped the wheel tighter as I passed, resisting the irrational urge to glance in the mirrors. It was just some woman, I told myself. Nothing more. Then, a few miles later, she was there again. Same dress, same posture, same slow steps along the shoulder. It was impossible. I had been driving steady, hadn't turned, hadn't passed any intersections. The road had been a straight shot. And yet, there she was. This time, as I passed, the radio crackled. A sharp burst of static, loud and sudden, like a needle scraping across an old record. My hands jerked on the wheel, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I thought I'd swerve right off the road. The static sputtered and died, leaving only the low murmur of white noise in its wake. A deep chill settled in my bones, crawling up the back of my neck like unseen fingers. I exhaled slowly, trying to shake it off. It was the exhaustion, I reasoned. Long nights on the road played tricks on the mind. I'd heard other truckers talk about highway hallucinations before, ghostly figures standing at the side of the road, strange lights that danced just outside the range of the headlights. It was all just the mind unraveling under the weight of too many sleepless nights. That had to be it. Still, my grip on the wheel tightened, my knuckles whitening as I forced myself to focus on the road ahead. But the road ahead wasn't empty. She was there again, exactly the same spot she had been before. The miles stretched on, but she never left. Every few minutes, she appeared again, standing in the same place as before, as if time and distance meant nothing to her. The first few times, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there were multiple women, some strange coincidence, some group of travelers playing a trick of repetition on my exhausted mind. But deep down, I knew better. The way she stood, the way her hair concealed her face, the way her feet barely seemed to touch the ground. It was always the same. Each time I passed her, the static on the radio grew louder. It started as a faint buzz, a whisper of interference, but with every sighting, it intensified. A distorted hum crackled through the speakers, broken by occasional bursts of something almost like words, but too garbled to understand. The wheel felt heavy in my hands. The rhythmic vibration of the tires on the asphalt, usually a comfort, now felt unsteady, uneven. My pulse hammered in my ears, in sync with the erratic bursts of static. I rubbed my eyes, trying to banish the exhaustion pressing down on me. Truckers saw things on the road. That much was fact. The mind played tricks in the silence, especially on stretches like this, where nothing but darkness existed beyond the reach of the headlights. But this wasn't like any trick I'd experienced before. I checked the dashboard clock. The numbers glowed faintly, but they didn't feel real. I had lost all sense of time. How long had I been driving? Minutes? Hours? The weight of exhaustion pressed down, but fear kept me sharp, kept me awake. I told myself to stop looking at the shoulder, to ignore her, to just drive. But something about her demanded attention. My hands trembled slightly on the wheel. The next time I saw her, I forced myself to stare straight ahead, to resist the pull of whatever presence she carried. But even as I did, the radio shrieked with another burst of static, so loud and sudden that it sent a bolt of panic through me. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something that turned my blood to ice. A shape, not on the road, not in the distance. She was on the truck. The mirror caught the image first. A glimpse of white fabric, hands pressed against the passenger window. The same posture, the same stillness, but impossibly close, standing on the side step of the cab, clinging to the door like something weightless, something unreal. Her head tilted slightly. The hair still concealed her face, but I could feel her staring. Not with eyes. There were no eyes visible, but with something deeper, something old and hungry. The radio screamed. I don't remember deciding to slam the brakes. It just happened, a gut reaction, sheer panic taking over. The truck lurched violently, tires screeching against the pavement. Everything inside the cab shifted, coffee sloshing from its cup, loose papers sliding across the dashboard. For a split second, I swore I heard movement outside, the faint rustle of fabric, a whisper of air displaced by something shifting. Then silence. I forced myself to look at the window. Nothing. The side step was empty. The road stretched on, untouched, unbroken. She was gone. My breath came in short, uneven bursts. I flexed my fingers, realizing they had gone numb from gripping the wheel too tightly. My pulse pounded against my skull. It had to be exhaustion. It had to be. But I knew, deep down, in some primal part of my brain that still understood fear, this was something else. I needed sleep, but stopping on this road, in this place, was unthinkable. So I pressed the gas and kept driving. The road stretched on, unbroken and silent. After the last encounter, the woman had disappeared, leaving only the lingering echo of static in my ears. For the first time in what felt like hours, the highway was empty. No sign of her along the shoulder, no flicker of white in the mirror. Just the hum of the tires, the low growl of the engine, and the vast, consuming darkness ahead. Relief settled in, slow and hesitant, creeping in around the edges of my fear. Maybe it was over. Maybe whatever I had seen, whatever had clung to my truck, had faded away into the night. The static had stopped. The radio played nothing but soft white noise now, harmless and distant, like the sound of wind moving through an open field. My grip on the wheel loosened slightly. My shoulders ached from the tension that had locked them in place for miles. I exhaled, slow and measured, trying to steady the erratic beat of my heart. But exhaustion was creeping in now, just as insidious as the fear had been. The deep kind of exhaustion that settled in the bones, made the edges of the world blur, turned the road into an endless loop. My eyelids grew heavier. The hum of the engine became rhythmic, lulling, blending with the static into something hypnotic. The road became a dark tunnel, stretching forever, swallowing time itself. I nodded forward just for a second, just long enough for the weight of sleep to sink in. And then something changed. A shift in the air, a presence. The sensation was subtle at first, the way the cab felt just a little too full, the air just a little too heavy. The temperature dropped a few degrees, enough for the hair on my arms to rise. I wasn't alone. My breath caught in my throat as my eyes snapped open. Something was there. Not outside. Inside. I turned my head, just slightly, just enough to confirm the awful truth. She was sitting in the passenger seat, motionless, the woman in white. She hadn't climbed in. I hadn't heard the door open, hadn't felt the shift of weight in the seat. She was just there, as if she had always been. Her dress was pristine, untouched by the dirt and dust of the road. Her hands rested lightly on her lap, fingers delicate and still. Her posture was perfect, spine straight, head tilted ever so slightly downward. Her hair, long and dark, cascaded over her face, hiding her features completely. She wasn't looking at me. Or maybe she was. The absence of her eyes was somehow worse than seeing them. Cold dread seeped into my veins, an unnatural stillness locking my body in place. The moment stretched, unnatural and wrong, as if time itself had stopped. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The radio crackled, a whisper of static, faint and distant. A sound beneath it, too distorted to understand. My pulse thundered in my ears. I blinked, and she was gone. The seat was empty. The radio fell silent. The cold remained. I stared at the empty space beside me, unable to breathe, unable to move. The air still carried the weight of her presence, as if she had only just left. My hand shook on the wheel. This wasn't exhaustion. This was something else. The truck rattled along the empty highway, but I wasn't really driving anymore, not consciously. The road had become a blur, a dark smear stretching endlessly ahead, the white lines melting into nothing. My hands were numb against the wheel, my body locked in a trance-like exhaustion, but my mind was wide awake, replaying the impossible over and over. She had been inside. The seat beside me had held her weight. The air had carried her presence. I could still feel the cold that had crept into my bones. Yet she had disappeared, evaporating into the silence as if she had never been there. But she had been. The truck stop sign appeared out of nowhere, the red glow flickering in the distance. I nearly missed the turn, my reaction sluggish, my mind tangled in the fog of terror and exhaustion. The truck groaned as I veered off the highway, tires crunching against gravel. The lot was nearly empty. A single rusted sedan sat beneath the flickering glow of the overhead lights, its windows dark, its presence as lifeless as the air around it. The gas station itself was a worn-out relic, the paint on the walls peeling, the glass doors smeared with age. But inside there was light, a dull, yellow glow that felt too thin, too weak against the pressing night. I stumbled out of the truck, my legs unsteady beneath me. The air outside was thick, heavy with the scent of old asphalt, and something else, something damp and metallic. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, but the lot was empty. The bell above the door jingled weakly as I pushed inside. The place was nearly as empty as the lot. The shelves were half-stocked with faded snack packages, the coolers humming softly in the background. An old man stood behind the counter, his face lined with the weight of too many years spent in a place like this. His eyes flicked up as I entered, and in an instant I saw something in them. Recognition. His gaze lingered a second too long, like he already knew why I was here, like he had seen a look on my face before. The weight of silence pressed down between us. The hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed too loud, too present. I forced myself forward, my steps uneven, my hands still shaking. The words sat heavy on my tongue, but I pushed them out. The mention of her changed everything. The old man's eyes darkened. His fingers, which had been tapping idly against the counter, froze. The space between us suddenly felt smaller, as if the very walls had closed in. He knew. There was no amusement, no skepticism, just quiet, resigned understanding. Truckers talked. Stories spread. Some were nonsense. Legends passed down in break rooms. Tales designed to spook rookies on their first long-haul drive. But this wasn't one of those stories. This one was different. This one had weight. His words came slow, heavy, final. She wasn't just a trick of exhaustion. She wasn't a hallucination. She had been seen before, again and again, and the story was always the same. She appeared at the roadside, walking in that same slow, unnatural way. If you kept driving, she got closer. First on a shoulder, then in the mirror, then beside you. Most truckers who saw her didn't make it to morning. The air inside the gas station felt wrong now, thick and unmoving. My skin itched with the sensation of something unseen, something just beyond the range of my vision. I needed to leave. The old man's voice dropped lower, as if speaking too loudly would summon her. I should leave while I still could. The door creaked as I pushed my way back outside. The air was colder now, The wind had died completely. The night was silent. I turned toward the truck, and the breath froze in my lungs. Wet footprints led from the cab to where I stood. Dark smudges of water, glistening under the fluorescent light. Not puddled, not random. Steps, precise, deliberate, leading toward me. The footprints didn't make sense. They were fresh, glistening in the dim, flickering gas station lights, leading from my truck to where I stood. The damp outline of bare feet pressed into the concrete, impossibly clear. Not smudges, not random splatters, steps. The realization clawed through my exhaustion. She had been inside again. Not just beside me, not just clinging to the window. Inside. While I was talking, while I was trying to grasp the reality of what was happening, she had already been closer than I could comprehend. The night air had a weight to it now. Something oppressive, something unnatural. Every instinct screamed to get back in the truck to drive, to put as much distance as possible between myself and this place. The moment my hand touched the door handle, the radio inside the cab came to life. A low hum at first, distant and crackling, like an untuned frequency caught on the edges of sound. Then a burst of static, sharp and violent, rattling through the air like the shriek of something alive. I climbed in, slamming the door behind me, locking it out of instinct, though I knew by now that locks didn't matter. The keys were already in the ignition. I didn't remember leaving them there. I twisted them hard, and the engine roared to life. I pulled out of the gas station too fast, the tires screeching against the pavement, the heavy body of the truck swaying from the force of my own desperation. The open road stretched ahead, empty, endless. The last stretch of night. I just had to make it to morning. The static rose again. It started as a low drone, vibrating through the speakers, then warped into something else. The sound twisted, became layered, shifting from static to something broken, something that almost sounded like laughter. I gripped the wheel tighter, forcing my eyes forward, refusing to look at the mirrors, refusing to acknowledge the growing presence in the air around me. The radio screeched. The laugh became clearer, but it wasn't a laugh. It was many, a chorus of voices, overlapping, distorting, climbing over each other in a sound that was wrong in every way. It was human and inhuman all at once. I wouldn't look. Not this time. Not again. But then movement. A flicker of white in my peripheral vision. I didn't need to turn to know. I already knew. She was there. The passenger seat wasn't empty anymore. I forced my eyes forward, locked my hands on the wheel, focused on the road, but I could feel her. A pressure in the air beside me. A weight. A presence that wasn't just an illusion, wasn't just a trick of exhaustion. I saw her, even without looking, sitting there, motionless, closer than before. Not just sitting, facing me. A breath I didn't want to take shuddered out of me. My grip on the wheel was iron, my fingers numb from the force of it. The truck felt smaller now, the space inside shrinking, the darkness thickening. The radio warbled. The laughter stopped. And then the woman moved. Slowly, impossibly, her head tilted. The curtain of black hair parted, inch by inch. And I saw her face. It wasn't a face at all. It was something else, something made of a face. The features were stretched too wide, the eyes hollow pits of black, sunken deep into skin that wasn't really skin at all. The mouth, too long, too open, was frozen in a soundless scream, the jaw unhinged, the corners splitting unnaturally far. A mouth not meant for speaking. A mouth meant for something else. The static returned in an instant, screaming. The sound was unbearable, piercing, crawling under my skin and rattling through my skull. The truck veered, my vision shaking, my pulse hammering so violently that I thought my heart might stop. The woman leaned closer. The truck swerved violently. I lost control. The headlights spun, the road tilting, the weight of the trailer dragging the cab with it. The world collapsed around me in metal and speed, the violent screech of tires skidding, the deafening roar of impact. And then, silence. No pain, no sound, only darkness. Morning came. A wrecked semi was found in a ditch off the highway. The front cab crumpled, the windshield shattered. The engine was still running, humming low beneath the wreckage. But the driver's seat was empty. There was no body, no blood, no sign that anyone had ever been inside. Just a radio, still crackling with static.